Hey, I'm Armchair Warlord James.
I'm Armchair Warlord Dan, and we're from armchairwarlords.com.
And the purpose of this video is to go over character creation for beginners in the game of Pathfinder.
As a resident tabletop gamer, I will be the beginner for RPGs.
And I'm going to take on the role of a pretty rule-strict game master who's going to walk Dan through how to create a character. So the first thing that we want to do, if you've watched our other videos, is decide on a class. So as a good GM, I'm going to ask Dan questions about what class he wants to play, and we'll go from there. So what do you see this character doing?
I'm more of a frontline combat sort of person. I don't really see myself as a caster.
Okay, so the choices for frontline combatants are barbarian, fighter, maybe cleric or paladin. But it sounds more like he's looking for strictly combat, so we'll go with barbarian or fighter. So
I like the sound of fighter. Let's roll with fighter.
alright. So the first thing we'll do is go to the fighter section, which is on page 55 of the core rulebook. And we'll start filling in the basic things for any fighter. So the first thing that you come across in the book are class skills, and we'll have Dan go through his character sheet and check off all the skills that are class skills, which for a fighter are climb, craft, handle animal, intimidate, knowledge dungeoneering, knowledge engineering, profession, ride, survival, and swim. Alright, so the next thing we come across are the class features, and the first thing there is weapon and armor proficiencies. So as a fighter, Dan's character is going to be proficient with all simple and martial weapons, all armor types, and all shields. And he's going to write those in the special abilities section of this character sheet, because this particular sheet isn't divided into class features and racial traits.
Simple and martial weapons, armor, and shields.
And the next thing we'll take note of is that fighters receive a bonus feat at first level and at every even level thereafter. Now he's not going to write that down, he's just going to keep it in mind. All of the other class features only apply once a character begins to level up, so we'll move on from there to the table. After you've filled in the class features, the next thing you want to go to is the table, and as a level 1 character you're going to be on the first row. So you'll go from left to right. Your base attack bonus is going to be +1. Your base fortitude save is going to be +2. Base reflex save is going to be +0. And base will be +0. Alright, so after we've decided on a class and he's filled in the basic information for his class, the next thing we need to figure out is what race he wants to play. So as a good GM dealing with a new character, I'm going to ask Dan what type of racial demographic his character can associate with. Typically your fighters are going to be dwarves, half-orcs, or humans, because they have the best set of racial traits that supplement the already given class abilities of a fighter. So Dan, do you see this character as more of a short, sturdy, gruff guy, or a big, intimidating warrior, or just your run-of-the-mill, jack-of-all-trades type fighter?
Being a beardy fellow, I can't pass up a chance to play a dwarf.
Excellent. So we'll go to the dwarf section, which is on page 21 of the core rulebook, and we'll fill in all of the dwarf racial traits. Now the first thing listed for any race is going to be their ability score modifiers. So we haven't rolled out the ability scores yet, so all Dan's going to do is make a simple mark next to the ones that are modified, which is a +2 to Constitution, a +2 to Wisdom, and a -2 to Charisma. Dwarves are really tough and wise and perceptive, but they're not very good at interacting with other people, so that's how they justify those bonuses. Dwarves are medium size. And then we're going to go back to the special abilities section and record the following racial traits. Dwarves are considered slow and steady. And this basically means that they move the same 20 feet no matter how heavy their armor is. So if they're wearing full plate or if they're wearing thin leather, they're still moving 20 feet per round. Dwarves have dark vision. And don't get the idea that dark vision means you can see perfectly normally in zero light. What that means is that you have like thermal heat vision, so you can see like you're wearing night vision goggles. The next thing they have is defensive training. And this means that dwarves get a +4 dodge bonus when they're fighting creatures of the giant subtype. The next thing is greed, which is a +2 racial bonus on appraised checks made to determine prices of non-magical goods made from metal or gemstones. The next thing is hatred. Dwarves get a +1 bonus on attack rolls against creatures of the orc and goblin subtypes because these are considered long-standing ancient racial foes of dwarves. The next thing is hardy. Dwarves receive a +2 bonus on saving throws against poison spells and spell-like abilities. They're tough, they're very resistant to those types of effects. The next thing is stability. Dwarves get a +4 racial bonus to their combat maneuver defense whenever they're resisting a bull rush or a trip. So because they're short and stocky, it's harder to trip them up or knock them over. The next thing is stone cunning. Dwarves receive a +2 bonus on perception checks to notice unusual stonework. This can include traps that are sunk into a wall or hidden doors made out of stone. And this has to do with the fact that most dwarves live underground, and so they're used to seeing stonework. And the next thing is dwarven weapon familiarity. All dwarves are racially familiar with weapons that are used specifically by their race, such as the dwarven war axe or the erdrush. And lastly, we'll take note of their starting languages. All dwarves start out knowing Common and Dwarven. And there's a list of bonus languages which may or may not apply depending on the intelligence bonus that Dan's character ends up with.
Because this is my first time playing, I'm going to take note of the page that the dwarf is on so that I can go back and read all those rules, because I probably won't remember them when it comes time to use them in a game.
That's an excellent thing to do with any rules. When you're writing down feats or racial traits or class features or anything that you might have to look up later, it's a good idea to jot down a page number next to it on your character sheet. So we've decided on class and we've decided on race, so now we're going to generate ability scores so that as Dan's calculating these scores and figuring out what they are, he can decide where's the best place to put the high numbers based on the choices that he's already made. Now, in order to simplify things, we're going to use the point-buy system. Now, the point-buy system doesn't require any dice rolling or a lot of math. It's a very simple table that you consult and figure out how many points I'm going to spend to increase my scores. We're also going to use the high fantasy point pool, which makes players slightly stronger than your average run-of-the-mill human or humanoid, but not epically powerful right from the beginning. So that gives you a 20-point pool to spend on your ability score modifications. All ability scores start out at a base 10, and the points increase as you go up.
So as a warrior, what sort of skills are going to be my go-to?
Any fighter is going to want to have high strength because he's going to want to do a lot of damage in combat. He's also going to consider constitution because he's going to want to have staying power. He's going to want to take hits and take damage without getting knocked down really quick. And as a dwarf who already receives a bonus to constitution, you can either go with the route of, since you have the bonus, you don't have to spend as many points, or you can add even more points into it to make your constitution almost superhuman.
Alright. Well, I might spend 7 points in strength, 7 points in constitution, leaving me with 6 points, which I'll break up evenly between intelligence, wisdom and charisma for 2 points each.
Alright, these are good choices for Dan's character because it's going to make him good and powerful in combat. It's giving him a lot of staying power, and at the same time he's spreading his points out into his remaining abilities so that his character is well-rounded on top of being a good combatant. So he's not weak in any one area, which is something that could create a problem for him in certain game situations. Okay? After you figure out your ability scores, you can notice the box beside it is ability score modifier. Some people get confused with ability score modifiers. They think, oh, well, there's this table I have to memorize, but there's not. It's a simple calculation. You just take the ability score, divide it by 2, and subtract 5, and you always round down. So if your ability score is 12, you divide 12 by 2 is 6, and subtract 5 is 1. Simple math. If your ability score is 13, you divide by 2 to 6.5, subtract 5, that's 1.5, but you always round down, so that's a 1. Alright, Dan's filled in those modifiers, so at this point it's a good idea for us to pause for a moment and let him transfer those modifiers into all the places on the character sheet that they apply to. Alright, so Dan is applying his ability score modifiers to all the spaces on his character sheet that require them. He's also going down his skill list and applying that ability score modifier to his untrained skills and his class skills. The reason he's doing it to the untrained skills are because those are skills that anyone can use whether you have ranks in them or not, so it's a good idea to know what your total modifier is going to be anytime you attempt to use one of those skills. Also, it's a good thing to note that the class skills, whether you put ranks in them or not, will give you a +3 bonus every time you use them because they're a class skill for your class. So, what we're going to do now is figure out which skills Dan wants to actually invest points in, because just like with every class, skill points are sparse. So it's a good idea to think ahead of which skills you want your character to have so that you spend those skill points wisely. Now, Dan's character wants to be a fighter. Fighters don't necessarily use a bunch of skills. They don't really need them for combat. Most of their skills are going to be things that add out of combat type bonuses to their player, or things that give the character flavor. So what do you want your character to be able to do?
Well, I've always wanted to be a blacksmith, so I'm going to take smith as a skill.
Alright.
Under my craft. I'll throw a point into dungeoneering. Going to assume I'll be tromping through a dungeon at some point. And probably throw a point into survival. That way, hopefully I don't die out in the wilderness.
Those are all good choices. Different classes are going to want to make different skill selections, but for Dan's fighter, these 3 skills are going to be pretty useful for him. The craftsmithing skill will give him some extra flavor. It will allow him to be able to do something that maybe most other classes or other players in his group can't do. It can be useful when you're repairing armor, repairing weapons, or trying to forge new armor and weapons, which some DMs will make players actually roll through and some won't. So, alright, we've picked his skills. The next thing we're going to go to are feats. Now, fighters get many more feats than the regular player because they get bonus combat feats at every even level. So it's even more important for you to have a good plan in mind of what you want your character to be able to do as he levels up, so that you can decide which feats you want to take early on that will complement the feats you want to take later on when you meet the prerequisites for them. So one thing about Dan's character that he's rolled so far is that he has no dexterity modifier. It's a good thing for fighters to be able to get into the combat quickly so that they can remove the choice from the GM of who to select as a target. So if the fighter gets into the mix and grabs the attention of many enemies, it makes it harder for the GM to selectively target, say, your casters and your healers that are much weaker and can't take hits. So in that case, you may want to consider something like improved initiative, which will give your character a +4 bonus to his initiative score and make it more likely that he gets to go first.
I always love to be first into a fight, so let's go with that. Page reference.
That will be page 115 of the core rulebook. The next thing Dan's going to want to consider is improving his fighting skills and starting off low on a feat tree that's going to lead into extremely powerful combat feats later on. One of the best early feats you can take in that regard is Weapon Focus. Weapon Focus is a specialized feat, meaning every time you take it, you have to select a specific weapon that it applies to. So you need to know, before you take it, what kind of weapon you want your character to use in combat.
I'm a dwarf. I like using axes. I hear tell of a dwarven war axe. That sounds like my jam.
Alright then, so Weapon Focus, Dwarven War Axe. What this will do is give Dan a +1 bonus on all of his attack rolls with a Dwarven War Axe. Since that's going to be his primary weapon, that'll be very useful for him. That +1 can make a huge difference early on in the game, because if you're rolling on just a basic D20, you're talking about a 5% chance to hit. +1 gives you an extra 5%, so you've basically doubled your chance to strike another target. Alright, so now Dan has selected his class, his race, has generated his ability scores, and he's picked his skills and feats. So the next thing to do is equip his character. So, there's a useful table on page 140 of the core rulebook, which gives you the starting wealth for any character class. So for a fighter, it's 5d6 times 10 gold pieces. We've decided to simplify that and go with the average of 175 gold. So you don't want to write that down on your character sheet right away, because you are going to be erasing it quickly and making lots of changes. So it's a good idea at this point to take out a piece of scratch paper and start writing down the things you want to buy and how much they cost, and just keep a running tally until you've either exhausted your supply of money or figured out all the things that you want to carry around with you. So the first thing to do with any character is to select his weapon, especially with a fighter. Your weapon is going to determine how much damage you can do in combat, so that's your most important choice in the beginning. So you've taken the weapon focus Dwarven War Axe feat, so you want to take a Dwarven War Axe as your primary weapon. That's going to cost you 30 gold pieces. This is a good weapon to choose for a fighter because it has high damage, and even though it's less likely to roll a critical threat, it's the weapon damage that you do if you confirm it is significantly higher at ×3. It's not a very heavy weapon, it only weighs 8 pounds, so it doesn't encumber you very much. And it's one-handed, which means you can wield it with a shield. So after we've made that selection...
Is it worth taking a backup weapon?
A lot of characters will carry a backup weapon, particularly characters will take a melee weapon and a ranged weapon, just so that they can have some reach if they get into a situation where, say, they're being shot at from across a cliff or across a gorge. Also, it's always a good idea to have something that is bladed and small that can be used for a lot of different situations, so a lot of players will take a dagger as a backup.
Sounds good.
The dagger is very cheap, it only costs 2 gold pieces, and you would be surprised how often that your character might run into situations where that dagger can save his life. If he gets caught in a net trap, or he needs to spring a trap, or if he needs to cut someone's rope, or if he's grappling with someone and wants to stab them because he can't necessarily hit at them with his big cumbersome weapon, the dagger can make all the difference. So now we'll move on to armor selection, and because Dan has chosen to be a damage absorbing type of fighter, he wants to select the best armor that he can get at this point. So most of the heavy armors are outside the price range of a beginning character, so you're going to be stuck with medium armor choices. If you want to also take a shield, it's a good idea to budget for something like scale mail or hide, because they offer a good starting armor bonus. They have a good maximum dexterity bonus, so you're not limited there. The armor check penalties are lower and they're lighter. And that also leaves you enough money left out of your big expenses to be able to purchase a pretty powerful shield later on.
Alright, I'll take scale now.
Alright. So of your shield choices, at this point you could choose to take a tower shield, but as we've discovered through testing, taking a tower shield is not necessarily a good choice for a starting player. It's extremely heavy, and it also offers some penalties on your attack. So you might want to go with the next best thing, which is a heavy steel shield. It'll provide a good armor bonus with a -2 armor check penalty, but it only weighs 15 pounds.
Sounds like a good idea.
Alright, so we've purchased our main things, armor and weapons. We're going to move on to mundane equipment. Things that every character needs or have while they're adventuring. Now this list, as you can see, is huge. We're going to point out a few things that every character is going to want to have and try to make this a simpler process. The first thing that you're going to want is a backpack. Backpack will allow you to carry around all the little things that you're going to have and not get tied up with trying to fit things in the pockets or end up leaving something on your horse that you need to have on your person. So a backpack is a good initial choice. After you've purchased that, one thing that every player always needs to have, or at least one member of every party always needs to have, is rope. You'd be surprised how often rope will come in handy. If you need to climb over a wall or scale down a cliff or bind an enemy, rope is always useful. The next thing to consider is how your GM is going to play his game. Now, I'm taking the role of a GM who is sort of a stickler for the rules, but not the total immersion type that's going to make you worry about where you eat and sleep and go to the bathroom and that kind of thing. But I will require that your character at least acknowledges that we're going to stop and break camp here, we're going to rest overnight, we'll eat our share of rations and things like that. So you might want to invest in a bedroll and some trail rations. And if you're a character who can't necessarily see in the dark, you might want to pick up a torch or at least a lantern or some flint and steel to create a fire. They are all good choices. Now, Dan being a dwarf, he's going to forego picking up a torch or a lantern because he doesn't need those to see in the dark, but he's still going to want a flint and steel to be able to light a fire and maybe cook food or be able to use that fire for defense.
Now, I've had a bit of a look through this list before we started, and I kind of like the idea of being able to throw flaming oil onto someone. So I'm going to buy 1 pint of oil and a clay pot to put it in.
That sounds like a good idea. This is what we were talking about in one of our other videos. If you've watched our equipment video where we went over how to select your initial equipment, being creative is always a good idea when you're a starting character because you're low on funds, you don't necessarily have the ability to go purchasing extremely powerful magic items, so sometimes you want to get creative with the things available and come up with good ideas to fill in gaps that your character might have or to deal with unusual situations. You run across a mob of low-level characters, throwing flaming oil on top of all of them can create a lot of panic and do some damage.
Well, I'm a dwarf and I have stubby legs, so I don't really feel like walking everywhere. So I might buy myself a pony.
Also a good idea, especially if you're playing with a GM who's going to stick with you about travel times and going from village to village or making journeys that take days or weeks. If you're on foot the whole way and you're having to make preparations such as purchasing rations and having water for the entire trip, having a horse can make a huge difference because you're traveling a lot faster and you can go a lot further and you don't have to make quite as many preparations. Also remember, if you're going to purchase a mount, under the Pathfinder rule set, all the accessories that go with your standard mount are all separate. So your bit and bridle, your saddle, and your saddlebags are all separate purchases.
So would a grappling hook be good with my rope?
Always. A grappling hook is necessary if you're going to throw your rope up onto a wall and make it climb. It's also good to have if you're going to scale down something as well.
I suppose there's never any harm in having an empty sack in case I need to stash my loot somewhere.
Always a good idea as well. Another thing that a lot of players don't think about is a whetstone for sharpening your weapon. Some GMs will want to make sure that you at least pay attention to the wear and tear of your weapons, and they can maybe penalize your damage over time as your weapon gets dull, or some GMs will also give you a bonus to weapon damage for the first combat or so after you sharpen it.
Having taken Smith as a craft skill, I might also get a set of artisan's tools, just to add to the flavour of my character.
When you pick up toolkits, those are probably things that you're going to want to leave on your horse. They can get weighty. Some of the kits can get up to 30, 40 pounds, like an alchemy lab, something like that. So if you do have a horse or a means of transportation, picking up artisan's kits is always a good idea. Another good purchase for every character to have is a water skin. And water skins aren't necessarily good for drinking. They can also be fire extinguishers, or they can be used to wash dirt or mud off of some hard to read script, clean your weapons, all kinds of things. And at 1 gold, it's a pretty cheap investment to make.
Well, adding all that up, I think I've got a few gold left over. So I might buy another weapon maybe something with a little bit more reach than my war axe and dagger.
Okay. Picking up a ranged weapon with the money that he has left, he's not going to be able to get anything like a bow or a crossbow, but there are some other ranged weapons, particularly thrown weapons, that are very good for fighters to have. They don't give you quite as much reach as the missile weapons, but you get the added bonus of being able to add your strength modifier into their damage. Some good choices are javelins, darts, spears, that type of thing.
Or I might get a spear. Seems like it'd be useful both on foot and if I have to throw it. And riding a horse, who knows, I might get to pretend I'm a knight with my little dwarven legs.
A spear is a very good weapon to choose as a backup weapon. It's very cheap at only 2 gold. It doesn't weigh much at only 6 pounds. It has a 20-foot reach, which will get across most chasms that your character might run across as a first level character. And if you're ever fighting a mounted creature, you get the added benefit of being able to brace it for some pretty serious additional damage.
So I notice I don't have a helmet with my armour, and I still have some gold left over. Can I, using my blacksmithing skills, buy an iron cooking pot and cut the front out of it so my character can just plonk that on his head and give himself a bit of protection from blows to his head?
That is an excellent idea. It's something that's not listed in the rule book as a standard purchase or something that you can do, but again, what we were talking about before, being creative, that's an excellent thing to do. So I'm going to approve that as the GM and allow Dan to make that purchase. And what I'll do is have him check his craft smithing skill to see if he's skilled enough and delicate enough with his hands to be able to make those corrections to his iron pot and make it into a usable helmet. Also, since there is no iron pot helmet in the rule book, I as a GM will make some simple decisions to see how this item is going to affect Dan's character in-game. And having thought it through, I'm going to say that it gives him a +2 to his armor class based on making it harder for him to suffer head injuries from being hit. And I'm also going to say that any blow that's directly to his head, he'll get some damage reduction, because an iron pot's pretty thick. If you're using a mundane weapon, it's going to soak up a lot of that damage. So we'll give him a damage reduction of 3/+1 whenever he's struck in the head. And that basically translates into 3 reduced damage anytime he's struck by a non-magical weapon.
Sounds good to me.
Alright. So after Dan has gone through all the previous steps, the last thing to do to round off his character are the additional rules. Now the first thing in the additional rules section is alignment. Now for a character who's never played before, choosing an alignment can be a daunting task. It's a good idea for GMs to walk their players through how they want their characters to behave in the game and make sure that they select an alignment that they're going to be skilled enough to roleplay, particularly if you're the type of GM who's going to enforce alignment or being true to an alignment inside the game. So I'll ask questions such as, how do you want your character to behave? Is your character going to have a good set of morals? That type of thing. And through that, we'll figure out an alignment. So then, is your character going to be a very moral person, or maybe a more amoral person who's not necessarily concerned with right and wrong?
Well, I see in my racial traits that I'm greedy, so I'm going to take that a step further and say that my character is mostly about himself. He's not particularly good, he's not evil, but he'll do what it takes to make himself money.
Okay. So that sounds to me like a neutral character. So we know at least one part of his alignment is going to be neutral. Now the next question I'm going to ask is your character going to be bound to a set of rules, or is he going to be more the type of guy who will do whatever he needs to do to accomplish his own ends, even if society doesn't necessarily look kindly upon his actions?
My dwarf wants to get paid.
Okay, so that on that part of the alignment tree sounds like chaotic. So he's going to go with an alignment of chaotic neutral. This can be, in some cases, a very difficult alignment to play, but also it can be a very easy alignment to play, especially for beginning characters, because it gives them the freedom to be able to make some wild decisions without necessarily suffering the side effects of acting outside a very specific alignment. Most of the other alignments require characters to behave a certain way, but chaotic neutral is fairly open-ended. Alright, so after he's selected his alignment, the next section that you come to is vital statistics. There are some very useful tables in this section that will allow you to fill in parts of a character sheet that are more biographical, not necessarily things that a beginning player is going to have a good firm knowledge of, such as how long do dwarves live. Most people don't know that. So the table here will give you a way to pre-generate that age without having to put too much thought into it. So a dwarf enters adulthood at 40 years. There's an adjustment there because he's a fighter of plus 5d6. So he'll roll his 5d6 and add that number of years to 40 and get himself a starting age.
On average, that'll be about 57.
Sounds about right. The next thing is random height and weight. A lot of characters who are new to the game don't necessarily know how tall is a dwarf supposed to be, how much is he supposed to weigh, so you can use the table on page 170 to roll out a random height and weight to start with. So for a male dwarf, your base height is 3 feet 9 inches and your base weight's 150 pounds. You modify that by a roll of 2d4, which averages out to about 4. So he'll add 4 inches onto his base height, which will make him 4 feet 1 inches tall. And he'll take that 4 modifier and multiply it by 7 and add that to the 150 base weight to give a base weight of 178 pounds.
And I think I'll have brown hair and grey eyes.
The next thing in the additional rules section is carrying capacity. This is going to be based solely on strength score. So we look at the table and get a strength score of 15, means that Dan can carry a light load of 66 pounds or less. His medium load will be 67 to 133 pounds, and his heavy load will be 134 to 200 pounds. Anything above 200 pounds and he's going to be overloaded and not able to move. You'll notice on the character sheet, the boxes beside that are for how much he can lift over his head, how much he can lift off the ground, and how much he can push or drag. Those are simple calculations. How much he can lift over his head is going to be equal to his maximum heavy load, so in this case 200 pounds. How much he can lift off the ground is twice his heavy load, so in this case 400 pounds. And how much he can push and drag is 5 times his heavy load, so in this case 1,000 pounds.
I am a beast.
Quite so. Alright, everything after that is an explanation of rules about movement, vision, and light, that sort of thing. So we're pretty much done with the fill-in portions of the character sheet. So at this point, we're going to pause and let Dan go and total up all of his different categories, make sure he's filled out all of his tables, and get his character sheet into a finished format. So once he's done those things, he's gone through the entire process from choosing a class, choosing a race, generating his ability scores, picking his skills and feats, picking his equipment, and then filling in the biographical details of his character, all without ever having to really roll dice if you just use the averages. And it takes about 5 to 10 minutes if you know what you're doing, and if you have a GM who can walk you through it quickly, who has a good grasp of the rules. And even if you don't, you're looking at maybe 25 to 30 minutes, flipping a few pages back and forth, filling in all the squares. It's not a very complicated process. This is the first of 4 videos, and what we're going to do to try to cover the 4 basic roles of any party. In any type of medieval fantasy game, you're going to have a combat-oriented person, you're going to have a utility person who's capable of doing things like opening locks and bypassing traps. You're also going to have a divine spellcaster who can heal your party, and you're going to have an arcane spellcaster who can do some serious damage and handle things like crowd control. So we covered the combat portion here. The next video will be on the divine caster, the cleric. We'd appreciate it if you'd like the video and subscribe to our channel, especially if you want to see more videos like this. And I'm James with Armchair Warlords.
I'm Dan from Armchair Warlords, and look us up at armchairwarlords.com.
Thanks for watching.